no intro. That's ballsy. That's kind of how they make these days.
No intro, and we're in. We're going. Micah, thanks you for coming back on. This is going to be kind of a split between. Well, I think we'll post this again under like a catching up corner on Maker's Bar under your original video we had 5 months ago there. Also, I'm going to start posting these catch up conversations to my own channel. Start growing my own channel. It's about time we really started doing that. But thank you for coming back. Good to see your face. Sorry you're sick, but thanks for making some time.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to power through it because, talking to you is really a healing experience.
I appreciate that. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna say the same thing to you, man, because I got off Twitter for a while and I got back on, and most voices are just insane. And it's sad that a lot of the insane ones I've seen, um, particularly in my kind of Twitter neck of the woods, where it's so much about Israel and Palestine, where I can see these bad actors, not even bad actors, it's like untruthful, just pushing stories that aren't true on both sides. Just the following is growing an insane amount. Um, it's sad to see, but then I see people like you. I'm like, okay, there's good people out here growing their accounts too and trying to get things done that direction too. So back at you, brother. Um, and I guess we can get right into it. The first thing that prompted us to get caught up here is I saw you post on Palantir. This is something I hadn't seen um, at all. Like I had no context to this. So I was like, wait, are we against Palantir? Is the left against Palantir right now? Like, what's going on? Um, so if you want to start on that situation and what we saw there, and then we guys get straight into it.
Right. So I was commenting on the news regarding the creation of a new Palantir database on every single American. Palantir was enlisted to collect data from the different elements of the government, different departments, which all have different, silos of information on Americans and create a uniform database. And a lot of people were talking about what this could be used for. Um, frankly, I'm really against that idea because I think that this administration is one that's fundamentally authoritarian in a lot of ways, and I don't think you have to look very hard to see their intentions to use the information they gather on Americans in ways that I would disapprove of. They talk about ending habeas corpus, for instance, getting rid of due process rights, right? The right of Americans not to be arbitrarily imprisoned without any sort of due process. When you have an administration that's talking about that kind of stuff, giving them any sort of information that can help them go after their political enemies is something that I'd be really worried about doing.
I agree with you there, and I also agree with you still, as we have always since we've known each other. That actually, I'd say even more so. I agree with you that this regime, this administration, Trump, all of it is just more and more. You can't deny it's just authoritarian in nature. Whether it be how they go about the immigration process, um, which is we could talk about what's happening in LA at the moment, or even just like little things like the news. Was it Newsweek? No, it was ABC. The ABC reporter that just had a bad review of Stephen Miller, which I thought was accurate personally, and now they're calling for him to be terminated. And just like, hey, you can't attack our friends, and which is kind of the job of the media, to be honest.
Right, right. I mean, so an ABC News anchor says his personal opinion on Stephen Miller, which is that he's a fascist. He's kind of bloodthirsty. He's a very angry person. In broad strokes, that was the message of his tweet. He deletes it. And okay, maybe a news anchor shouldn't be expressing their personal opinion in those ways, but the amount of outrage that the not just right wingers have levied upon him, but people that are senior in the administration, like Caroline Levitt. I mean, Trump. People are talking about how he needs to resign, right, or be fired, and ABC should be ashamed of all this. Meanwhile, Fox News, Newsmax, all these other news organizations on their side of the aisle say all types of stuff, which is highly opinionated 24/7, and no one calls on them to be fired, right? You never saw Biden say that, Fox News anchors should lose their positions because they have an opinion. So I think if you're going to hold a standard that these news anchors should be impartial, you should hold it universally. And second, the people in high up political office should not be telling independent news organizations what their hiring policy should be. They should not be going after people that are critical of them. That's not what this country is about. They talk about making America great again. One of the great things about America is that we have free speech in this country. JD Vance went to Europe. and lecture them about how they don't have very much free speech and they should be ashamed of that and they should change. And I think, in large part when he said that, he was right, but he's not holding that same standard up in the United States because he's doing the same kind of stuff they do in Europe. Actually, even worse. He's weaponizing his position of political office against those that are critical of his administration.
Yeah, no, it's an insane contradiction, truly. And like you mentioned, Biden wouldn't have done this, or like it's just an unthinkable going down this route of telling people, hey, you need to fire this person, like the cancel culture, but coming from a government. So it's way more than that. It's unthinkable on the left, which is one of the things, as I'm still like politically homeless, but I just have this lean towards the left, especially right now. Um, I mean, given this administration, I was ready to lean right. I was ready to vote right. If it would have gone Nikki Haley and some common sense in there, like I was ready to do that. And it's just gone so far the other way. The things that they're doing, it's unthinkable. It's truly unthinkable. Like there's just a level of decorum and respect for government overreach or against government overreach in the Constitution, and just they're just crossing every single line. It seems.
Right. I mean, this is authoritarianism. This is
Yeah.
not a left versus right thing. This is a freedom versus totalitarian competition, and you see it all over the place. You mentioned the LA riots,
Yeah.
um, so-called riots. So there's a few people burning cars and running around with Mexican flags. Okay, great. That we've seen sites of people burning cars after football games when they're upset with one of the sides. That doesn't mean there's a full blown riot. Actually, if you talk to anybody that's over there, if you look at footage of the massive protests instead of just these very highly selected, highly publicized instances, it's not riots. But what's happening? Well, the National Guard has been sent in, despite the fact that the local mayor and local governor didn't ask for it. Right? Having the federal government take over the National Guard of California and send military forces onto American streets to police Americans is authoritarian. We're also having a huge military parade in the United States, which is something that we haven't done in my lifetime and something I never remember our country doing. It makes us look a lot more like North Korea than the United States. Yeah, it's like the only way you don't see that we are sliding towards authoritarianism right now is if you don't want to see it. You refuse to see it because it's obvious and there's new indications of it every single day.
Yeah, that actually touches on one of my thoughts I've always had about Trump. I wouldn't say always, but 2017, 2018, somewhere in there, I had this thought. It seemed to still be true today. Is that whatever you want to see when you look at Trump, you'll be able to see it. This is how, again, in my neck of the woods, people were able to convince themselves that Trump is super, just like the best friend Israel's ever had. And then when he's running again for election, Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians are like, we're going to get Trump elected, and it's going to be better than with Kamala. And you're able to do it every single venue, which is actually giving me pause. Literally until probably a month or two into this administration, the new administration, it gave me pause. Like, okay, I'm also a person, and I agree with my analysis there, but like, I'm also going to see what I want to see. It's like, what do I want to see? And so I try and like take that breath and like, okay, try and avoid that, try and avoid what we want to see, and just take what's here in reality. And I agree with you. And like, even when I try and other side the LA protests and riots, it it's hard for me to find the amount of evidence that I would need to be comfortable. Like, hey, let's send in this is actually has happened under Obama, but this when the difference is this stuff is super, super close to the border. Like it's on the border when it was under Obama, when it was under Bush. Like we've sent National Guard before, not as north as LA. Not like this is like in America, and the pretext was riots, and there's no actual confirmed buildings being burned, which is one of the kind of pretext things they had, and you just see some scary pictures.
Well, the
And
legal pretext
yeah,
is actually that foreign invaders are present in the United States because that's what gives him the ability to seize the National Guard and command them to do this. There's clearly not invaders. I mean, even a riot wouldn't justify the president unilaterally putting the National Guard and boots on the ground in California in the way that he has, right? So if you look at the order that he issued that legally permitted him to do this, it's alleging just ridiculous things that everyone knows is not true beyond like right wing rhetoric, which is extreme. And for a long time, people have said, their rhetoric is extreme, they're exaggerating, but that's politics. Well, no, 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 no. They're extreme. They're using the rhetoric in the way they are purposely for legal reasons, right? Because they have to amp it up to the max so the president can grab more emergency powers, which this administration has been doing 24/7 since Trump first got into office. I mean, we've been living under emergency rule since day one of the Trump administration.
Yeah, that is insane. And actually, could you touch on that real quick? The emergency rule part of it. Can you explain that to someone that may not be
Well,
versed in
right,
that?
right. So you look across the board. Let's look at a really high profile example with tariffs. Uh, you know, in the Constitution, for everyone who's taken U.S. history courses and civics, you might have read excerpts of it. You might remember that it said explicitly that Congress is the one that is responsible for levying taxes. So any sort of bill that affects taxes has to be passed by Congress and perhaps signed by the president if it's not a veto-proof majority. But under this administration, we've seen for short periods of time the largest tax hikes Americans have ever seen in the entire history of the United States, with the unilateral imposition of tariffs, which are taxes on imports. And how was that possible? It wasn't possible because of congressional action. Congress made no action. The president just said, I'm going to impose these tariffs. Now, how is he able to do that? Well, because there is an exception to Congress being able to control tax rates in a piece of legislation which was passed previously, which gives the president the ability to manipulate tariffs in response to emergencies. So that there's like this emergency. You can declare an emergency, and then you can mess with your trade policy. Um, and so what did he say? Well, he said, if, for instance, regarding the Canadian and Mexican tariffs, he said there's an emergency of fentanyl coming into the United States. This is a necessary trade measure that's required to keep Americans safe from fentanyl. Now, that was obviously legal nonsense because look at Canada. Canada is responsible for less than 2% of all the fentanyl that comes to the United States. There's probably more fentanyl that comes over the border from the United States into Canada than
That
from Canada
that
into the
actually
United
is
States.
true.
And
More goes the other way.
right, and it has literally nothing to do with security, actually, because those tariffs were imposed after Canada had taken all possible steps to reduce fentanyl flows into the United States. So it was a ridiculous legal justification, but that's the one that he claimed, right? Because he wanted to do everything via executive order rather than going to Congress.
Yeah, and it's a sign of an age in America and kind of beyond. Although there has been a backlash to Trump, I think, like just in other elections around the world, but it's a sign of an age of populism. And like we've seen America first, quote unquote, before in this country, back in 1910s, 1920s, and I'm sure it's happened in the 1800s, and like we see it around the globe. Like we're gonna put this country first, and what that actually kind of means is a bias against immigrants, even when immigrants are going to be good for the country. Poor economic thinking. It's just kind of guards up. Oh, the world is horrible, and it just plays on this like fear and anger that people have, and we're just in this populist moment. Well, it's easy. I mean, he is a populist candidate. Part of the reason he won, and back when I maybe even pre-met you, um, RFK got this big following being a populist, and actually I was a fan of RFK for the first couple months he was on the scene, and it was really until I started having more conversations and listening to podcasts that he wasn't on himself, and just like hearing the back and forth that I kind of backed off that. And saying all that, I see the appeal. Like, I see the appeal of populism in an age of, well, our institutions lied to us, and it's kind of obvious. I don't think anyone our age can seriously say, "Oh yeah, we believe the media doesn't lie to us, or our institutions haven't lied to us," and we've been unfortunately proven correct at times. And I think so many people, most people, taking the wrong lessons out of that. But to say all of that, one of the things I've seen rising on the left, because I could go on all day with you about how, yeah, okay, this is horrible. This is authoritarianism. And we could talk about literally any issue, which is scary to say that, but literally any issue, whether it be economic, um, from a national political allyship point of view. really, honestly, anything. The immigration, anything that you go, everything that he's doing is just horrible. What also scares me, and all that is worth talking about, what also scares me is the reaction I'm seeing on the left from people that I like and respect. And I really thought I was kind of on the same ship with there, is we're turning towards, or there is a turn towards populism on the left, where I was like, okay, there are solid thought leaders and politicians in the center left, moderates like that makes sense. Let's get back to normalcy. Let's put the things that we actually need to put together. Like, hey, we are at a deficit and we do need to spend less money or raise more tax or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing us go all the way towards AOC. Are you seeing that? Are you support that? Kind of where is your mind at when you're looking at the left's reaction to all this?
I mean, clearly, if you look at the state of the Democratic Party in terms of its popularity, whatever we've been doing isn't working, right? And by we, I mean really party leadership, because I don't condone most of that. And so there's a lot of people in the party that are trying to pitch alternative visions for where the party goes. And, they have more appeal because everybody knows, well, at least that's not here, right? And so there's the populist left, which wants to present a narrative of society, which is to at least some extent anti-capitalist. The businesses, the capitalist interests, the rich, they own the government. The government does their bidding, and that's why everything's bad. And you can kind of reduce almost all problems in society to either directly business greed or the effects of the greed of businesses and capitalists in their control of the government. So that's one theory, and I think it's probably doing better now than it was doing before the election. There's another theory, though, from people on this center, which is also a populist theory. There's the non-populist too, but they're less boring, so we won't talk about them. And this is the populism that I find more appealing. It's like, first, before we get into like what that looks like, we need to define what populism is. And in
Yeah,
my
good
view,
call.
of course, it's contentious what populism is defined as. Populism is being anti the status quo, thinking that things could be dramatically better than they are, and being able to harness people's grievances. And a lot of people have different grievances. If you look at the MAGA movement, it's fundamentally about grievances against existing institutions like the media, like academia, like immigrants, like foreigners. There's a lot of grievances up in there, and they try to reduce all issues. Not, the leftists reduce it to capitalists, they reduce it to these actors. I think that there actually is a set of groups which is responsible for at least a lot of our fundamental problems. And so I think that I offer a populism which is based on like the actual people that are causing the issues. Now, I don't think it's healthy, as some populists do, to characterize all of the people that are kind of standing in the way of progress currently as fundamentally evil. And I think that's where populism gets into really, really bad direction, where they say, these people are worth less than others. They're evil, and they know they're evil, and they need to be destroyed. That's where you get genocides. That's where you get racism. I don't think any of those things. But a lot of people that are populists in the center would say, like, taking an issue such as the national debt, we have been ripped off by decades of politicians willing to borrow trillions of dollars of unsustainable debt to slightly boost their popularity. And that's something that we should be upset about, right?
Absolutely.
It's not a wonky argument, which is just like the national debt, whatever, deficits, interest payments, whatever. There's more of an emotional infusion in the kind of the populist narrative about the national debt, which I think it makes it more potent with the American people, which are not just like policy wonks. They're also upset, and they want somebody that taps into their upsetness and is also upset about how messed up things are. So that's just one example, but I think you can have many populisms about other issues that are true narratives that can be characterized as populist because they're against the status quo. They're pointing their fingers at certain groups, which are the cause of our issue in that regard.
So who are the people you would point your fingers at when you said there are groups, like main groups? I'd say, hey, these are the reasons for you. Like, who are you looking at?
Yeah, I think selfish political class is one of the most central ones. I mean, you look at our government and it's just completely dysfunctional. Our democracy is totally rigged, and our politicians can fix it anytime they wanted to, right? So, for instance, we have campaign finance laws that are totally messed up ever since Citizens United. Any dark money group can donate unlimited amounts to any sort of campaign, right? And that is just not a real democracy. That could be changed with a constitutional amendment. It's not like that's not a possible thing to do if the politicians wouldn't sign on to it. But of course, it never changes. Another example is gerrymandering. The politicians draw the lines that the elections operate within to benefit themselves, to create districts that they're always going to win. This is why in some states, the Democrats will be the majority and they'll get 40% of the seats because the Republicans drew the lines. And sometimes vice versa, the Democrats draw the lines. This is something that could be banned federally. Actually, Democrats tried to do so previously. I believe almost all of them were bought onto that, but it hasn't been banned, right? There should be a frustration about that. The second group, I think, is just powerful, organized interest groups in general. So there is if you look at any sort of powerful interest group in the United States that's spending billions of dollars on lobbying, they're getting something for that lobbying, right? You don't spend billions of dollars for nothing. And almost always the thing that they're getting is at our collective expense. They're getting regulatory protections, they're getting subsidies, they're getting tax preferences that we collectively, everyone else in this country, has to pay for to enrich them. And I think that's the story of bad policy over and over and over in the United States, from housing to healthcare, from trade policy to even immigration. We are a country of rent seekers, these people that just feast not on value creation and making their businesses better and serving consumers, but of going to the government to get special privileges for themselves.
That makes sense. And other people leading, whether it be leading candidates for maybe the next presidency, or a movement in particular, a couple movements in particular that you look to, that you're like, okay, yes, this is something I want to support. I want to spend my time like, hey, let's get these people elected. Let's get these movements more steam, because you could focus on, hey, let's fix this gerrymandering law. Let's fix a XYZ type thing. What is the first step? When you say everything's broken, it can be blackpilling for people. It can be, okay, like, just fuck, dude. Like, what do we even do? Like, how do we change this? It's not, if we've been able to make a constitutional amendment forever and it's never happened, what gives people hope that that constitutional amendment will come, or that a step and change will come? Because I feel like if people get too black-pilled, sorry, I'll answer the question after this, but if people get too black-pilled, it's just like, oh man, I don't know what to do. I'm just not going to do anything until you get something super radical, which is the Trump movement, the MAGA movement. And that's what the populism for them that wakes them up. So where is that fire that you kind of want to set on your side, so to speak?
Well, I think people are already blackpilled with politics. That's why the majority of them don't vote. And those that do vote just vote because they're trying to prevent the other side from annihilating them, right? What they really need is hope and a vision of how their life could be better than it currently is. And that things can actually change. And so I think that, you give them an overarching narrative about how we can actually rejuvenate these institutions, which are so fundamentally compromised, right? It's like, well, there's a lot of ways you can actually do this. Like gerrymandering bans only require a majority in states or at the federal level. Electoral college reform. There's some stuff you can do on campaign finance reform, but you can't do an unlimited amount. Another issue is partisan primaries. This is right now, politicians are beholden to the most extreme 5% of the population, the people that actually vote in primaries. That's why these Republicans in plenty of districts are taking really extreme positions. I mean, some of them made their entire personality basically praising Trump, talking about how we need to rename lakes after Trump. We need to amend the Constitution so we can run for an additional term. I mean, like, this is like a really ridiculous thing to do. And it's certainly not the most popular thing they could be doing for their district, but it is something that helps them win their Republican primary. If we had a nonpartisan primary that all the politicians participated within, where all voters from across the ideological spectrum voted within, politicians would no longer have the incentive to pander to the extremes, right? If you have approval voting, right, you can end up getting rid of the two-party system that Americans hate so much. And I say this as a Democrat. I don't think that people should only have the red or the blue flavor. I think they should have a whole range of flavors. I think that, these can be complicated ideas, but there's a lot of complicated ideas that have been messaged in really straightforward ways. And so I think that talking about fundamentally tackling the two-party duopolistic system, the corrupted politics that Americans are so tired of, it's something that'd be inspiring for people. And there's other things that we could talk about too regarding economics. And whenever you're running a campaign, you don't run on every single idea that you're going to do. You run on ideas that are easy to understand, that are indicative of the broader themes and positioning that you have. Because I think a lot of Americans are not wonks, and they don't pretend to be. They just want people that they can trust. And having some policy ideas that they understand, that they know are good, makes them trust you a lot more in other issues. So if we're talking about economics, there's so many ways in which our economy is rigged against normal people, and the government is often helping the companies do the rigging. I'll point to just one example. The financial payment processing system. Every time you swipe a card, your Visa, your credit card, the banks are taking 2 to 5% of the transaction value for themselves. And the vendors are not getting that money. So they're jacking up the price on everyone. If you capped those fees that they're charging to every single American without them knowing, you could bring prices down automatically overnight by 1 to 2%.
That'd be a great. Man, I feel like you would get so much support on that policy. Like there are little things. One of the things I want to ask you next here is like, are there leaders in particular going in 2026 and 2028 that you want to back, that you see the messaging from, and you believe in? Because like for me, I do see people on the left, but they're just not popular enough, and they're just not going to be popular enough. To speak to your point, that it's like, okay, these are people that I hear their opinions on 3, 4, 5 issues. It's like, yeah, you have common sense. This makes sense. Okay, they're going to have my broad support. I'm going to trust them to be able to delegate and think rationally about other topics. Richie Torres is someone that I love, for example, but it's just like, I don't think that guy's going to ever be popular enough to have like a big
He's
national
certainly a
brand.
polarizing figure in the party.
Yeah, but he shouldn't be. This is my problem with the left. It's not just the Jewish stuff. Like this is one big thing. It was just like that's not a polarizing figure. It's just not. It's not in the slightest a polarizing figure at all. He's just like, hey man, in 2021, like this is anti-Semitism that's happening. I see this is just bigotry that's happening. This isn't like anything that's about social justice rights. And this is back in 2021 when the West Bank, they canceled their elections, and somehow it just turns into this whole thing about Israel, and it really just turns about against American Jews. And his support for a Jewish state existing is one of the only things that makes him polarizing. Because every other topic, which by the way, that's also the correct moral opinion, but like every other topic, it's just basically just also common sense, left wing ideas, um, without going into
I think if
anything
it
crazy.
wasn't for the Israel-Palestine issue, Richie Torres wouldn't really be a controversial figure, but he's made it very central to his brand, and he fights with people in a way that a lot of other politicians don't, which is going to make him, necessarily more controversial. But I think if you took that off, then yeah, he's really not that polarizing of a figure.
Yeah,
But
those.
to get to your
Yeah.
question about,
Yes.
do I see leaders? Um, for me, I want to see them. And I know I'm going to support whoever the Democrats put up, even if they put up a skeleton. And it's not because I'm, a super enthusiastic supporter of skeletons. It's because I'm a huge opponent of fascists. And that's just what this regime that we live under is. It's a fascist regime. And, if anybody doubts that, I'll talk to them for 4 hours and I'll give them all the evidence in the universe to indicate that's overwhelmingly the case. Now, I do think that there's some candidates that are strong. I think, you look at Pete Buttigieg, he has 35% in the Democratic primary polls. His big issue is with African American voters, and we'll see if he's able to create more trust with that community. I think he's a smart person uh, who's more in touch with where the country is in terms of its views and what it wants than most people, and that's why I think that you put him in front of any crowd, and they're gonna like the guy a lot more after listening to him than they did before listening to him. Um, that being said, me and Pete have policy disagreements. I don't agree with every single stance that he's taken historically. I think Andy
Well, yeah.
Bashir could be. Go ahead.
I know. I was gonna say. I think that goes without saying. I don't think you shouldn't align with anybody 100% of the time. Especially the more you learn about their policies versus what you believe in. So that makes sense. But I'll
Well,
go to your
what's
next guy.
interesting, what's interesting to me is just the fundamental moral character and epistemology of the candidates. And what do I mean by epistemology? It's how they go about coming to their policy views. So some people are very sophisticated. You know, they have experts. They actually like to study and read and learn, and they're open-minded. And that kind of candidate who has good values, right? And so far they have good values, is the kind of person I trust a lot more than someone who might on paper have more policy alignment with me. But you know, in practice, there's a lot of policy areas that I don't understand that are really intricate and nuanced, that are very contextually contingent. And you want somebody who's just a genuinely good person who has a good way of figuring out what their views are on things to handle that. My understanding from people that have interacted with Pete Buttigieg is that he's a good guy. I think it's also true for other people like Andy Bashir. I think he's done a good job as governor of Kentucky. Obviously, a lot of people are talking about Josh Shapiro as well. Wes Moore, he hasn't been a governor for a very long period of time. Neither has Josh Shapiro, but Josh Shapiro, I think, has more of a political background. Yeah, I'm interested in these people, and I think nobody can be super confident that any of them is going to be the right pick yet. But they give me some hope, and I think Stephen A. Smith is an underrated candidate. I don't think he'd actually be the best president of the bunch, but I think Democrats have a big branding
Oh,
problem,
see
and
that.
so probably getting somebody who's not cloaked in the Democratic Party brand actually might benefit the party a lot.
See, that's what scares me though. Is like I'd I'd be so repulsed. I think that'd be my last string of like I just I've only voted blue and rooted blue, but I also think that's because by the time I could vote, it's been Trump. Like that's just like the only guy. It's been Trump, Trump, Trump on the right side. And what terrifies me about the left is that I see it just going down this populist route of like I see it's going to be a Stephen A. It's going to be an AOC, or it's going to be someone that's just like, oh my god, what is going on? Everyone else you listed, I'm at least open to. If not, I like. I think Pete Buttigieg does have a good radar, a good moral radar. Um, does have the experience. I don't know a lot about Josh Shapiro, but he seems to be like a good guy. Wes Moore, I'd say the same thing about. I've learned both of them more. Um, and like they also seem to have personalities and willing to actually be authentic, which is something that is just that's what Kamala lacked. I don't think she had any authenticity to her. Um, and we can go down the mistakes that the left has made as far as um, they probably just should have had an open primary. And I think it would have been Kamala anyway. It probably would have made her a better candidate. Biden should have stepped down, should have ran it. All these mistakes, but I honestly think a lot of it was just mistakes. And my big fear, and I hate that my big fears have. I get most things wrong, like every human gets most things wrong. But my big fears politically in America have been correct. And that's terrifying to me. And right now, my big fear on the left is, which is much smaller than what I have on the right, because I agree with you, it's authoritarian. It is fascist in a lot of senses. It's very, very scary. And that is like the number one thing we need to fight. But to fight that, you need to win. And my big fear on the left is that it's the pendulum is going to swing so far to the other side where, like, okay, Stephen A seems fine. AOC seems fine. Bernie Sanders, although he's probably too old at this point, but Bernie Sanders, it's like, but when you look into these people, they have really bad moral compasses, or they're just, in Stephen A's case, it's so clearly about himself. It's the same thing as Trump, except I would say hopefully not. I don't see any corruption there, but it's the same thing. It's so clear, like, okay, this guy just cares about him. It's all about me and his brand, and
No, yeah, I mean,
I,
clearly Stephen A.
yeah,
is not the best pick for president of the United States. He's
no,
not qualified for it at all.
rather
But
was Trump.
you know, I think that the fundamental issue the Democratic Party had to sort out in this upcoming primary is that people don't like the brand of the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party is connected to the status quo. I mean, think about the brand of the party right now. Bill Clinton is still one of the faces of the party. And so we had Bill, we had Obama, we had Biden, and then, we had all these other candidates, Al Gore, which is connected to Bill, Hillary, which is connected to Bill. Um, Biden was connected to Obama, obviously, but Kamala was connected to Biden. And it's like the entire status quo, like most of the period of the past like 30 years, or at least half of it, Democrats have been in power. And Americans look at that and they say, well, how could you be against the status quo if you've been the ones that have been in charge? Now, it's really important to mention that we actually live in a country of checks and balances. So the Democratic agenda has never been fully passed, not even close.
Yeah.
For instance, Bill Clinton won a dramatic healthcare reform. That healthcare reform was completely destroyed by a Republican Congress. But that misunderstanding of how the government works, where people say, well, you have the presidency, why are you not changing everything, is one that's not going away. And that means that if the party wants to rebuild trust with all these people who have looked at the Democratic administrations after administration and been very disappointed, the party has to say, hey, we're not the same guys. We're different. We're going to be different in some fundamental ways. That's what Trump did. That's why he was able to change the coalition, right? I mean, J.D. Vance even still digs at neoconservatives and attacks the old Republican Party way. And that gives a permission structure to everyone who currently doesn't like the Republican Party to look and say, well, this is a different one, right? And potentially come into the fold. And the Democratic Party has to do the same thing. And they're not going to do that by choosing somebody who's a huge insider, who's unwilling to criticize the past. And so it's easier to do that when you have a fully outsider candidate. Pete Buttigieg is tied to the Biden administration. Of course, he could always say, well, I don't actually agree with everything that they did. And I don't agree with Biden running again. And out of respect for him, I haven't been saying that, but I'm saying that now. I don't know how well it's going to go for him. But fundamentally, from a political angle, the kind of outsider candidates, despite the fact that they're probably worse for the country, are ones that are probably politically stronger.
That makes sense. Can I pitch you someone that you can take to your circles then? Have you heard of Scott Galloway?
He sounds familiar, but I'm not sure who that is.
If we're gonna go outsider, and talk about messaging, man, this guy can message well. So he is a professor, I want to say NYU, business professor there. But
Oh, yeah, I think I know who this
yeah,
is.
so he started businesses. He's got a good story too. He was I want to say immigrant parents out of California, and it fully admits he I got into UCLA on like affirmative action basically. I wasn't a good student before I got in. I wasn't really a good student once I got in, and I also ended up getting into Berkeley, and he goes on to start these marketing companies and just uber successful, super crazy successful. Um, and starts teaching at NYU, and he's able to break down messaging in a very, very good way.
No,
And
I've seen this stuff.
yeah,
I think he gets it more than most people on the left.
I think so as well. And I think the messaging there of he has one breakdown. I'm sure he's done it multiple times, but he has a clip that I've seen that's like, hey, let's break this down to if America was a person, or if America was a household, we're making $50,000. We have $70,000 in debt. We have a $220,000 mortgage. And he does this whole breakdown of everything. It's like, this makes a ton of sense. He offers a good message on what masculinity should be, because that's one of the big things that somehow got red pilled, got red coded, is with Rogan and everything, which I have my own thing on. When you were talking about, and I'll get to this in a second, when you were talking about like, oh, this is a different type of Republican Party, so I can hop on. I think they got the people that hopped on are the worst people that could ever be a part of a coalition. You need to win elections, I get that, but anywho, I'll get to that later. The Scott Galloway is able to message things very well, and one of those messaging things that would just win people like me, and maybe I'm not maybe like I'm not the majority. I like to think I'm just like kind of an average guy, but maybe I'm just not. Where just be the adults in the room. That's what the Democrats can do. Hey, just be the adults in the room, and you'll get me. You'll get everyone just like me. And again, maybe I'm not common. I think I am though. It's just that's all I'm asking for. That's all we want is just, hey, we have problems. There's a really bad debt problem, and right now the right is insane. And like we just be the adults in the room, and he's able to message that super well. And you're making a ton of sense to me where it's like we need a new brand. Okay, could that be the brand? And like, could you go get a guy like Scott Galloway? It doesn't have to be him, but like I I would like to see that happen. I just don't see it out anywhere at the moment, and it's starting to worry me. We're getting closer to 2026 and closer to 2028. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm hoping there's elections then. Um, right now Trump's threatening Elon, if you donate to Democrats, I'll destroy you, right? He went after Act Blue, which is the biggest Democratic fundraising organization, and all the Democrat aligned law firms trying to destroy them. So I really hope we have elections. If we do, I think a person like Scott Galloway, he'll be a little bit older, by he's like 64 years old when that happens. I think he would be a totally good candidate. And I'd be interested in that. Um, and yeah, I think Democrats have a messaging issue with people maybe like you, because it seems like they're doing politics and they're doing messaging rather than just saying what the truth is and what they really think is. And that the lack of authenticity is a really big problem for any sort of political movement. It's because people don't want to vote for people they don't trust. And that's part of the reason why Trump has had a unique appeal. He says crazy things, but at least you know that he actually thinks what he's saying, because there's no other reason for him to say it. Um, Now, I'd argue that Trump just says usually whatever the thing is that he was told most recently,
Yeah, I think he just
which explains
feels
his
things.
extremely erratic foreign
Yeah.
policy views, especially regarding the Middle East. But um, I think that Democrats would benefit from candidates that are very honest. And you say, talk about being the adults in the room, right? Like, we don't need to make every single issue simplified to like the same narrative over and over again about the rich getting richer or whatever. I think it's good to say that whenever it's actually true. And I think
Mhm.
the big beautiful bill, it's true about that. But the big thing about the big beautiful bill is that it is taking our country towards a debt catastrophe, right? So our debt right now, our deficit is $2 trillion a year. They want to add, if it's made permanent, what is it, $3.8 trillion to the deficit? So you add another $400 billion or so to a year to our deficit. Right now, the deficit's 33% of every single dollar that we spend. So every single dollar that we spend, 33 cents are borrowed. Well, let's bring that up to 38.40 cents, right? That's unsustainable. Nobody can run their own budget on that. And if this happens and we don't take radical action now, our country is going to be racking up such huge debt with such huge amounts of interest. We're just not going to have money for anything else. And if we keep pushing it off over and over and over again for forever, eventually we head towards a debt crisis where we have just a total and complete catastrophe, where we don't have money for Medicare. We don't have money for Social Security. We can't actually pay the debt back. So we have to do huge amounts of money printing, or we have to basically
Default.
declare
Yeah.
bankruptcy. And like that is a world economic catastrophe, and that is exactly what this Republican Party is taking us towards, despite the fact they have made $150 billion of cuts all over the place with Doge, destroying foreign aid, destroying medical research, destroying departments like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in the name of the sacrifice is worth it to prevent this catastrophe. Meanwhile, they have a bill that makes that catastrophe all the more imminent. It's really remarkable. And I'd like to see more people deliver an authentic message on that.
Yeah, I would also love that. And that's the number one thing that really matters at the end of the day is it's the economy. And like we just have to keep a good economy. The strong middle class is what I mean, I feel like a politician, but like it's true. It's like the strong middle class and building the middle class is how this country is one of the many reasons, but it's how this country became the world power, and we have to prioritize that. And yeah, it's just an erratic. It's funny you mentioned you said Trump's just so erratic every day, saying something new based on the last thing you heard, and especially in the Middle East. I'd argue it'd be especially with Russia and Ukraine, but then especially with like American politic, it's getting even crazier. And like the fact that we were able to sit here and say, oh, Biden was dying and his brain is just deteriorating. And yeah, okay, true. And I don't think, I guess older folks didn't know this because that debate really did him in, and but I wasn't surprised by that performance. I don't know many people that were surprised by that performance, around my age at least. And like I feel like the same thing's starting to happen, has been happening to be honest, but it's really starting to ramp up with Trump. And like,
Sure.
and it's like, hey, this guy's his brain is deteriorating rather quickly. and he has all this power that presidents have never wielded before. And um,
They even before it deteriorated, it was bad, right?
yeah,
I
oh,
mean,
100%,
like,
yeah,
I talk about the Middle East. One example is we were told that the Iran nuclear deal bargained by President Obama was the most ridiculous, absurd, terrible deal the United States has ever entered into. He withdrew. The Iranians started making nuclear weapons, enriching uranium again, and then he just struck a new Iran deal.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's like it's the same deal over and over. It's the same deal.
yeah. Which,
Um,
which, by the way, I do disagree with that deal, but like it, but that is like, I think you could give worse examples of, and maybe actually the one in my head is more ideological capture of the administration than it is him deteriorating. But again, this all scares me is that the people he's placed around him, it's just terrifying. The people he's placed around him are just yes men, and it's all about
right.
loyalty, and it's authoritarian. And the moment for me that was like the moment, one of the moments for me that was like, oh, this is like really, really, really bad. It's nothing to do with even Israel, which is obviously internationally political. Foreign politics is my number one thing. It was with Ukraine and Russia, where obviously Trump was the 24-hour peace thing is like always insane. And like, I don't think any of our leaders have ever really understood Russia. I think we have as if they were a different color, maybe they had a different religion. Like if they were purple people, like I think we'd understand them. But there's something about Russia that the Western mind is cannot wrap its mind around. Um, but there was a day where he tweeted or truth, Russian forces have surrounded Ukrainian cities, and like, basically pleading with them, like, don't do anything, please stop this. And Ukrainians are tweeting that. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, they're not anywhere near this town or this. And this was a Russian propaganda point that went to the Russian population, not to America. Like, obviously, there's a ton of. All you have to do is look at Tim Pool and all those guys. Like, there's a ton of propaganda being pushed. This propaganda wasn't pushed in America. It was pushed in Russia to like increase the Russian morale. And with the president's tweeting it, I was like, how did this happen? Like, how did that get there? Well, I guess you look at Tulsi Gabbard is his head of intelligence there, and she probably put that on his desk. And this guy's just gonna. It's not even gonna take a second to like. I guess you should trust your people. We put them in there to trust them, but it shows where your mind's at
Well,
when you
don't
put
trust
people in
Tulsi
power.
Gabbard, right?
It's just insane.
Yeah, maybe him packing the administration with the least qualified band of goons and loyal ideologues is not a good idea. Making the general counsel of the EPA like a 26-year-old, which has no environmental law experience and 1 year of actual law experience. Recently, he hired the kid of a politician who has no college degree. He's a failed YouTuber with less than 10,000 subscribers, made him one of the senior people at the Department of Defense. And there's a new guy who has a really interesting hairdo who's like 22 years old, who just got another senior admin position. These people are not being hired based on merit. They're being hired based on, I guess, their loyalty as shown by their Reddit posts or 4chan usage. And well, it turns out that whenever all your information and policy briefings come from these guys, it doesn't turn out so well. Trump's intuitions themselves don't help though, because he has plenty of intuitions that he won't ever drop, like his obsession with tariffs, which he's been told by economists over and over and over again, don't actually make things more expensive for Americans. Yet he's continued to refuse to believe that, despite the fact that we actually see his tariffs raising prices to this day.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
no, it is insane. It's all very scary. Again, my hope with talking to you here today was just like to become more confident in the direction of the Democratic Party's response. I fully believe we're gonna have elections. If I'm wrong about that, my gosh, there's there's a lot more to worry about than I'm currently worried about. But um, yeah, I kind of saw the Trump train coming back in this last election, um, and I was very, very correct about the Israel Jewish American, even forget Israel, the Jewish American experience, like how this is gonna play out, like, and it's just I'm tired of these political fears being correct. I really am, and my fear again is like I really do think it's going to be a Stephen A. Or it's going to be an AOC. I just really think that's what's going to end up happening. Um, and that could also end in disaster. That could end in a huge disaster. So it makes me feel good when I hear you say, yes, we need a new brand, like we need a new pitch. Wes Moore, and you list off these people like this makes
And
sense.
not just a brand, of
Yeah.
actual substance too.
Yes, of course, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah, yeah.
of course. Although I think there is better substance. Again, you can add to it and build new foundations. But I think there's a better substance and better foundation on the left right now. I
Oh yeah.
mean,
Oh, absolutely.
like you said, they try to get a gerrymandering bill passed, and there's just more common sense there, at least at the moment. And
Absolutely. No
yeah,
question.
yeah. I just don't see the right coming back. Maybe it turns. I haven't understood the neocon. To be honest, like this is something I know they call them neocons, but the people that call old conservatives neocons, they're the new conservatives. So they are the neocon, uh, and I just see this. I see them catching more steam with this group in the future. So like I'll go back to I mentioned this before when I was talking about Scott Galloway. I think the people that are completely lost to the left, to be honest, are the ones that just like still see themselves center left, maybe just a tad center right. Um, Even if they don't define it that way, but it's gonna be like the Rogans and the comedian class, kind of like Theo Vaughn, Rogan, Andrew Schultz, and the tech bros of David Sachs. I'm trying to think of like famous names, not just like my friends, but like there's this tends to be male coalition that it really went from on the horseshoe theory. I wish I had a marker just put on my screen right now. On the horseshoe theory, they were like over here on like this kind of Bernie Sanders left, pretty far down that horseshoe, and they didn't cross at the bottom of like pure bigotry, but they stayed low. If here's the top of that horseshoe, they stayed low down here and just went to the right, and that's just where they are now. Like that type of hippie, that type of like, oh man, I'm just all war is bad, so any war that's being fought isn't just like it. That type of person, they're just on the right. They just got there and they're not coming back. There's no like I could always be wrong. I'm wrong about many things in life, but like they're not coming back. They're gonna keep going down this route of the new
I
vague
don't know. I think
Republican.
they're just one leader of the Republican Party away from the brand being very different. If Marco Rubio wins the Republican primary, then I think they're gone. If JD Vance wins the primary and he does something that pisses them off, they could be gone. I think people are pretty flexible, ideologically. But I don't want us to go on for too crazy long. I have my own YouTube channel where I'm trying to express a lot of the ideas about my vision of the party. And hopefully, if it grows dramatically and everybody subscribes to it, we can actually make an impact. You've seen that the internet matters more to parties than ever before. Ezra Klein's book about abundance has spawned a party-wide discourse for the past 5 months now, and I'm hoping that I can participate in that discourse and spread this idea of a populism from the center, maybe a mainstream populism that I think is the best politically for the Democratic Party, but most importantly, the most true and the most able to offer genuine solutions to the problems that Americans are facing in their everyday lives.
Absolutely. And where could everyone find you? So it's the Micah Erfan. Your name's on. Yes, it's right there.
Just
Okay,
look up Micah Erfan on YouTube, you'll find it.
perfect.
If you also just look it up online, you can find my website, which links everything, including my Substack, where I also post my videos. But yeah, that's the two. And you can also find it on any sort of podcasting platform. You can find the Micah Erfan Show, which is what it's called on podcasting platforms, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Perfect. Love it. And I would love to talk about abundance. I know you're sick though. We've already been on for an hour. I told you 30 minutes, and now I just get talking. I like hearing your thoughts though. It makes me feel better every time that I hear you talk. Like, all right, there are good, sane people working hard at this. Uh, yeah, it's just refreshing. So I'd love to next time we show on, we talk about the abundance movement and what's there. And um, honestly, like Ezra Klein, like he's someone that's I've started to like more since the abundance movement book and all these
Yeah,
things.
I like him. Oh, it's always great talking to you. That could be the next.
Yeah,
I might lose my voice, but I hope people enjoyed the conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we did. I appreciate making the time. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope they did as well. I'll get this posted pretty quickly. Again, I'm gonna post this on my channel, which I need to rebrand. I think it's still called The Good of Twitter. I haven't posted to my own channel since I've started working with Maker's Bar, and the growth there has been incredible. Very happy to be a part of it. But we'll see if we can also get this on Maker's Bar and like again its own section. I'm thinking the catch up corner. When we post it under your original video, which everyone is also welcome to go watch. It's also, if you just type in on YouTube, which is the only place you can find Maker's Bar at the moment, Maker's Bar, Micah Erfan. The original conversation we had is about 6 months ago, 11,000 views at the time, and we're up to 350,000 subscribers here now. So doing big things. It's a really great place. The owner and founder, her vision's incredible. So everyone should feel free to go there as well. Micah, I'll let you take some cold medicine and get some rest and hopefully feel better. And we'll keep talking on Twitter. And I look forward to following your journey. And I'm sure we'll talk again on a
We will.
podcast sometime soon.
We will. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, brother. Have a good one.